Hey guys, welcome back to my another video. So on this video we will be looking into React testing library and Jest, and especially we'll be looking into test-driven approach. So if you guys enjoy the content on the channel, give a thumbs up to the video and subscribe to the channel. Without further ado, let's get started. So I created this project using create React app script. So what we're going to be doing is we're not going to build any implementation details first. Rather, we will write our test first and then do the implementation. So what's the benefit of like using a test-driven approach? So most of the times, if you write the implementation first and then write the test, then what happens is you tend to write the unit test based on your implementation. But if you write test first based on the like your requirements, you will make sure that requirements are fulfilled 100%, and you tend to find more bugs, like or catch more bugs. So that's the useful thing about like using test-driven approach. And I will show you guys at the end of the video. Like most of the times I work full time, like as a React developer, but I don't use this approach due to some time constraint and those kind of things. So I'm trying to improve my implementation to like to follow this kind of approach, because this is really useful and it provides a lot. Like helps you to generate like quality code. So what I've done is I've done like few cleanups on app.js file and on app.css as well. So the main idea, so I'm gonna add my GitHub repo on the description, so you guys can look into the README docs. So basically on the README docs, I have laid out the requirements here. So it says on the heading, it says requirements for form. So we're going to be creating a form, a simple form. So there are a few requirements that we need to consider, and we will tackle those one by one. So the first requirement says form should contain name and email labels, and each label should have a corresponding input element. So what it means is name should have its own input element and email should have its own input element. And there should be a button with the text of submit, and which should be disabled by default. So once the user fills out the input field, and once both of the input fields have some sort of content in it, the button should be enabled. And when the button is enabled, when we click it, the form should be cleared. So that's our requirement. So now how do we approach this? Since we have laid out all of the steps, right, we're going to tackle them one by one. So what we're going to be doing is, rather than focusing on what goes on the browser, we will be focusing on the test itself. So I'm going to open a terminal. Okay, this is running my project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run npm run test script. All right, it failed. So what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to pull this to I think this should be fine. I was thinking of putting it to the right, but I think this should be good. So we're going to write our test and all of our logic on app.test file. So how do we even get started, right? Because on our app.js file, there is nothing in there. There's only one div. So let's, based on the requirements, what it says is, let's get the label, right? It says that we need to have a label. So let's start writing test for those. So in order to write a test against a component, you have to bring in few packages first from testing library /react. So let's start by importing those. So I'm going to import render function. So this will help us to render the actual component. And I'm going to bring in a screen function as well. So this will help us to like get actual HTML elements with various query. It has various like query methods we can use to grab the elements from the actual documents node. So I'm going to grab those from at testing library /react, and I need to bring in my app component as well, because that's the component that I'm testing, right? So you need to bring that. Bring import app from /app. So that should have our like app ready. And I'm gonna bring one more package called user event. So basically what it does is it like helps us to mimic the user behavior. Let's say if you have an input field and if you start typing, we can like run various functions like like typing behavior, like the click events, those kind of stuff. You can use a fire event from a React testing library itself, but like it has like a little bit of like weird syntax, so I like to use user event. I'm going to import user event from React testing library / user event. All right, I think that's should be it in terms of what we need. Let me bring this down so that we have all of our inputs grouped together. All right, so how do we write the test? So basically, you can use directly, like the test keyword to write the test. But what I like to do is I like to group my text, like all of my test. So I'm gonna have a describe block. So it's gonna say what kind of test I'm writing or what kind of component I'm testing. So I'm gonna say app, since I'm testing the app component, right? And as a second argument, it takes a callback function. And this is where we will put all of our test suites. So in order to write a test suite, you can use test keyword, but I like to use it, but it doesn't matter. You can use any of those. Oops, not import. Yeah, sometimes this autocomplete thing just kills me. Not in, should be it. And over here, same approach like we did on describe. We're gonna provide some sort of information on what we are testing, and then pass a callback function as a second argument. So I'm just gonna say it should render and display the elements correctly. And as a second argument, you will pass a callback function. Alright, now if we save it, our test is passed. The reason is unless there is some sort of error on your test is going to pass. Alright, let's start making some changes. Now if we go back to the requirements, right? There was a requirement, like forms should contain name and email labels, and those labels should have corresponding input elements, right? Let's tackle these. So let's write a test for these first. Right, so as mentioned, first thing, before even grabbing the HTML elements from the document, we need to render our component first, right? If we don't render our components, there is no way of getting those nodes. So let's do that. So in order to render a component, we're just going to use that render function that we grabbed. And inside that render function, you can just render your app component. So that should render our app. And once we render it, let's say we are trying to create a label and the input field, right? So let's get a hold of that, that input element by using that label. So I'm just gonna say const input element name. So what I'm saying here is I'm targeting input element for which has the label of name. Basically, it doesn't matter. You can put whatever the name you want here. Equals to, and I'm going to use that screen function that I grabbed, and I can query it based on various functions. So what I'm interested in right now is I'm trying to get the input element based on its label text. So let's say if I'm trying to grab the input element for email, I'll try to find the label of email because that's the requirement that we had, right? So this would have corresponding input elements. So let's call get by label text, and over here you can directly provide string, but what I like to do is I like to use regular expressions. So you can just do 2 slashes, and inside that I'm gonna have something a label similar to name and put I at the end, so for the regular expression to show that like it's case insensitive. So anything that matches in like uppercase N and the following things, it should be matched. Now our test is gonna fail. right there, it says that unable to find the label with the text of name. I mean, that makes sense, right? Because we don't have that element yet. So the basically on test driven approach, right, what happens is you write the red test first, meaning the failing test first based on the requirements. You do the implementation, make your test to green, and do some refactor without breaking your test. And you keep on, doing this cycle over and over again. All right, now what I want to do is once I get the hold of this element, I want to see if that element is in the document or not. Right now, we know that it's not in document, but we're going to do assertions. So what do I mean by assertions? So assertions are the statements which actually where we make sure what is the thing that we're testing and what do we want to be tested for. In order to write an assertion, you can use an expect keyword, and inside that you can provide what is the thing you're testing. So I'm trying to test this input element name, and over here you can get hold of all of the just assertion functions. So what I'm trying to test is to be in the document. If I just do this, our test is going to fail because first thing is there's no element with the label of name, and if it's not there, there's no way it's going to be any. It doesn't even reach our assertion statement. All right, I think see this get by label text, if it does not find anything, I think it returns a an error. I think if we do, I might be wrong, but let's give it a shot. You can even query by label text, query by label text, and now it says that it didn't error out, but now it's erroring out on our expect, right, on our assertion. It didn't error out here. So if you are trying to get a hold of something which might not be in your DOM, you could use query by label text. So that way it does not throw an error, it just returns null. But if you use get, it means that you are sure that that should be there. So I'm gonna go back to get by label text, but that's the other way to do it. I just wanted to show you guys. All right, now since our test is failing, let's go ahead and do the implementation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to app.js because this is the place where we're going to put our stuff. Right here, I'm going to have a label tag, and then within that label, I'm just going to say name. And here, there are a few props you can pass. I'm going to pass a prop called HTML for. So this is going to be for name because I'm going to put the name as ID on our input field. And that's pretty much it. Now it's still complaining because it is not able to find the input element, but we do see our label here. The good thing about the React testing library and Jest is it even shows all of your HTML elements, currently rendering on DOM. So we do see our label, but we need to add an input field too because that was the a half portion of the second requirement. Right, let's go to app.js now and let's add an input field. And I'm going to have an ID of name, and I think that should be it for now. Once I save it, our test is passed. So it means that it's able to find the label text with name, and it knows that that's in the document, so that's good. So now we're going to do the same thing for our input element for email. So I'm going to copy this to copy two statements. Come back here, but instead of input element name, I'm going to say input element email, and here as well I'm going to say email, and I'm going to say this input element email to be in the document. So if I save it, it should fail because we don't have a email element. If we check out the DOM elements, we only have DOM elements for name. So it's going to be the same thing now. So now we have red test. Now we're going to go back to our app.js file, and fix this issue. So I'm going to have a label again, just like that, and it's going to have a label of email, and it's going to have a HTML for, and it's going to be for email, and for input, I'm just going to copy this, and it's going to have a ID of email. So once I save it, our error should go away because that element should be there now. Nice, that is good. And now on our requirements, there was a, because I think we're done with our requirement. So this is done because we added both labels, and it should have corresponding input elements. So that's done too. So now there is a requirement called button should have a text of submit, and which should be disabled by default. So let's write a unit test for that one. Not the unit testing, like the regular test for that one. So we're just gonna, since we're on like the initial portion of art, which is for the app, right, we're just gonna write a test here just to make sure our components are rendered properly. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do const button element equals to, and I'm gonna use screen again to get the hold of the button element, and I'm gonna say get by text, and I'm specifically looking for submit text. You can be, rather than searching for label text, you could be more specific and say get by role and look for button. But in this case, I'm just gonna do like by label text. There are a bunch of options. You could like explore the React testing library docs. There are a bunch of things where you can like query it. Okay, for our requirements, it has to be label by submit button, right? So label text by, oh, not label by text. I wanted to see it by get by text, not the label, because the button is not going to have a label. And let's have an assertion. I'm going to say expect this button element. First thing I'm going to test is this should be in the document, meaning in the DOM. And if you remember from our second requirement, from this requirement, right, it should be disabled by default when we render that. So let's write a test case for that one as well. I'm going to expect button element in order to test if anything is disabled or not. So there is a function called to be disabled. Yeah, this Jest helper, like assertions, right? Like they sound, like really like a plain English basically. It's just like you just gotta call to be disabled. So if we look our test, first thing is it's not even able to find the get by text because there is nothing, no element called like has the text of submit, and that's why it can't even reach our assertion. So let's fix that. Since we had our red test, now we're gonna try to make it green. Right after this input element, I'm gonna have a button which is gonna say submit. If I save that, let's see if we made some improvements. Now it's able to find the element with the text submit, and it's able to go to the assertion where it says it should be in the document, but now it's failing on it should be on disabled. So what's happening is button is not being disabled. It makes sense because we haven't added any logic to make it disabled. So for now, since we don't have any state set up for our input elements, I'm just gonna say it's gonna be disabled every time. So if you want to pass, this is a real small trick. If you guys didn't know it, most of you guys might have known it, but I'm gonna say it anyhow. So if you want to provide any sort of like Boolean props, let's say disable in this case, if you want to pass the true value or the truthy value, then you can just call that prop, and you don't need to do like disable equals to true. That's the thing that I'm doing here. Now all of our tests will be passed. So now if we go back here, we did this. The second one is done too, and third one is done too. So we can just do a check mark here from our requirements. Right now, let's move on to fourth requirement. It says once the input element have content, then buttons should be enabled. So what does it mean? So once we write something on both of our fields, then our button should be enabled. It shouldn't be disabled anymore. Right, let's since that is the different functionality, rather than like just rendering stuff, I'm gonna have a different tested. I'm gonna call it should enable the button. All right, how do I name it? Let's do it. It should handle the user interaction properly. And same thing, it's going to have a callback function, and we're going to write our logic here. So the first thing that we need is we need to render the app, that's for sure. And also we need to get a hold of our input elements and our button. Let's grab these. That's for email and that's for button. All right, now let's go to new line. Now what we're going to do is, since we're trying to test if the button is disabled or not, within that time we're going to be testing if we can type in the input field or not. So if you remember, we brought this user event library that we're going to be using to like handle various user interactions. So let's start by typing something on our name input field. So in order to mimic the certain events, what you can do is you can just call that user event dot, let's see, if you're typing something, just call the type function, and it's going to take two arguments. One is going to be the actual HTML element where you are trying to perform this certain events, right? So that would be your first argument. So in this case, that is input element name. So meaning I'm trying to type something on the input field for name. And the second argument is what you want to type. Let's say I'm trying to type, my name is JavaScript programmer. So that will mimic the user behavior. All right, now we typed on the name field. Now we want to type it on the email field, right? So let me grab that HTML element, come back here, and for this text, I'm just going to say JavaScript at gmail.com. So what this should do is it should type something in our both of our input fields, and based on the requirement, now this requirement is fulfilled, right? We were able to get hold of this because we are able to type on our input field. We're not sure if it's typing or not, but at least our test suggests that we are able to type in. Now we need to make that button enable. So I can have a assertion here saying that, all right, once this happens, once all of this happens, I want the button to be enabled. To expect over here, if you remember, we call this to be disabled. So now we don't want it to be disabled. So I'm just going to grab the button element dot. If you are trying to use a not operator on any sort of actions, you can change those off. So let's see, if I was interested in this negation of this to be disabled, what I can do is call not to be disabled, just like that. If I come back here, what's going on? Receive button is disabled, but we're trying to say, like saying it should not be disabled. I mean, test fair, like the failure of test makes sense. But if you don't like this approach, there's another way you can do it. You can just call to be enable if you don't want to change the not operator. So this is all the way to do it. We're going to see the same issue on our test because right now the button is disabled. All right, that's the requirement that we got. and we've written our test. Now it's red. Now what's the next step? As you might have guessed, the next step is to do the actual implementation. So we're gonna have to bring in a few states, not few state, only one state, use state, because so that we can keep track of our input elements, and based on that state, we're gonna make our button disabled or not. So basically, the criteria for the button to be disabled is if the input fields, for both of the input fields, right, both of the states are empty string, then the button will be disabled. I mean, it would be either or, not and operator, basically. If any of the input field is empty string, the button will be disabled. All right, I'm going to bring in use state, and that's going to come from React. All right, I'm going to come here. I'm going to say const name set name. So I'm not going to explain. I assume like you know basic like state management, at least the local state management on React. If you want to see tutorial on all of these hooks, I have created a like the hooks tutorial, so I would recommend to check out this playlist. All right, now we're gonna set the same thing for email. Set email. It's gonna be state, and it's gonna be a empty string as well. All right, we have our states basically set up, so now the only thing left to do is to hook this up. So I'm gonna click here. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to edit multiple lines at once. So if you don't know, you can press the Option key if you're on Mac, and I think on Windows it should be Alt key. If you press that and click here, you are able to like edit multiple lines at once. So that's why I did that. Here I'm gonna have a value property. Value equals to, let's just do name for now. I'm gonna change clear on. And I'm going to have an onChange property here, and I'm going to pass the inline function, which is going to take a event, and I'm going to call a set name, and the set name will get the value from event dot target dot value. Right, that's it. So now over here it shouldn't be name, it should be email. And here it should not be set name, it should be set email. All right, if I'm not wrong, I think that's it in terms of what we need on state. Now we need to use that state to make sure like our button is enabled basically when we type something, because our tests are still failing. Now rather than passing disable as true every time, I'm gonna pass some logic here. So basically what I'm gonna do is if name is equal to empty string or email is equal to empty string. So if that is the case, then our button should be disabled. So if any of these fields are empty string, then our button is disabled. If it's not, then our button will be enabled for the user to type in. Hope this is making sense. Only thing that we're doing here is just making sure you're like following our requirements here. So what's the second requirement? Second, I think we're ready on our last requirements actually. So I think this is done. Once the input element have content in it, button should be enabled. All right, let's have a check mark there. Well, then we are on our last requirements now. So what we are saying here is when we click the button, it should clear out our input field. So there should be nothing in our input field. Since that's the different functionality which does not relate to this any of these, so we're gonna have to write a different test suite for that. Okay, right after this I'm gonna come down and start writing our logic. So it should clear input fields when form is submitted, and button should be disabled. I think I forgot to write that on the requirement. Did I? Form should be cleared and button should be disabled. Let's write it right. Even though there was not on the requirement, because on the very first thing, right? Once we clear the thing, this input elements, I think it was Where was it? Because when the button didn't have content, right, it should be disabled. I think that's why it would have triggered. But let's be like generic here and just write it. Form should be clear and button should be disabled. So that's our requirement. So clear input fields when form is submitted, and the button should be disabled. So we're gonna have a callback function, and here we're gonna have to bring in a few things, the same things that we had earlier. Basically, we're rendering the app, grabbing the name element, email element, and button element. And what do we want to do? First thing, we also need to test, because we added this logic, this disable logic, but we are not like actually testing this, because we just tested it once. But what we want to make sure is, if the user types in the name field and does not type in the like on the email field, we want to make sure like that button is still disabled, right? It should only get enabled when both of these things are typed, because we didn't test that on the above test suite. So let's test that now. I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to copy this user event type. So I'm going to mimic the behavior. All right, now user typed on the name field. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to test, let's see if the button is enabled or not. I'm going to use expect button element. Oops, not that. Button element dot what I want to test. It should still be disabled, right? Because if you just type on one field, it should still be disabled. Let's test it. All right, looks like it is. So since we typed on this input element, the button is still disabled. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna type on our second input field for email. Let's do that. Now here I'm gonna expect button element dot to be enabled in this case, because we typed on both of our fields, right? Yep, just like that it passes, because this is the time where we want to make sure our button is enabled. All right, now what do we want to test now? I think now we are ready to make to click on that button, because we basically typed on both of our input fields. Now it's time to submit our form. So the way to do that is we're going to use this user event again. Earlier we simulated the typing behavior. Right now we are trying to click on this button element. In order to do that, there is a function called click, and all you need to do is just pass the element wherever you are trying to click. So that should handle the actual user like click behavior. And what are we expecting when we click on that button? As mentioned on our requirements, form should get cleared, meaning like all of these input elements should have the value of 0, not 0, like empty string. All right, let's test that out. Oh, you know what? I just remember one thing. We typed here, but we didn't check the value here, right? So we can even check the value here, right here. Expect input element email dot to have, I think it's to have value of. So what is the value we're expecting? If we typed JavaScript programmer, then our value should be JavaScript programmer as well, right? Is it even typing it? I think hold on. Oh, I'm gonna have to wrap this in the set timeout, so I'm not gonna do that. All right, let's leave it for now. I'm sorry, because these are the local things, so you have to do timeouts and all of this hacky stuff. I don't want to do that. All right, let's go back here. So once we click on that button element, what do we want to see? After we click on the button element, we want to make sure we're gonna have assertions here. Input element email dot to have value. of empty string. Where this test case is passing? Okay, now it's failing. Okay, it says that it received JavaScript. I wonder, I don't know, it wasn't, because I thought that was it earlier. It's failing on 45. All right, now we're gonna have the same thing for email. It should be empty once we type something. And at the end, we also want to test something, right, which is button to be disabled. Expect button element to be disabled. All of our tests is going to fail now. But it can't even reach there because it just fails on this 44th statement. Alright, I think that should do it. So we mimic the individual typing behavior, and we made sure that on when we type on one element and not type on the other one, the button is still disabled. Once we type on both of the elements, then the button will be enabled. So if the button is enabled, we are able to click on that element. Once we click, we want to make sure, like input, the email field is empty. Not email here, it should be name here. Hold on, should be name. What happens if I do this? I want to do a real quick experiment here. Okay, so earlier when I tried to take the value, okay, now it's working. So I was wrong. So I grabbed the wrong input element. So what I wanted to show you guys is once you type on the element and have the value of this, because we were not sure, because we thought, like this is going to do it, but we're not sure, right? In order to check the value, what we can do is expect that input element name to have value, right? Since we typed JavaScript programmer, we want to make sure that's the value. The value should be JavaScript programmer, right? That's the value we're getting. And if we do here, it's JavaScript programmer, our test should pass, at least this assertion. But we wanted to test the same thing on here as well, because who knows, right? This user event thing is not typing at all. And if I say this, it should fail there on line 41. All right. Here, I think it should be input element name. That's not a name. That should be for email. And this is getting confusing, all of these elements. Yep, right there on line 41, it's failing. It says that it got this JavaScript at gmail.com because that's the one user event used to type. So we want to make sure that value is equal to this. We're just doing, like extra bit of testing here. It's not necessary if you don't want it. Just to make sure, like this library is doing what it's supposed to do. All right, now we have written our requirements. Now the only thing left to do is to make sure, like all of these tests are passing, right? All right, let's work on clearing the form first. And once we clear the form, this should, with this button being disabled, should be happening already because we already added the logic. So for this button, I'm going to add a type of submit, so that even if users clicks the enter button, like it submits the form. And I'm going to have an on-click property here. On-click equals to, let's have a handle submit function. Let's copy that and write a function definition right here. Const handle submit. It's going to take an event because we're going to have to prevent the default behavior so that it does not refresh the browser. So let's just do e.prevent default. And all we're going to do here is as soon as the form is submitted, I'm going to set the name to empty string. And okay, as soon as I do that, right, let's see what's the progress we have it on our input field. So now it's throwing error on line 47. If we trace back that line, it's right here. So meaning our input name element already has a empty string as a value. So this statement got passed. So as soon as this statement gets passed, this will pass too. Right now, only thing they have to do here is just to set the email to empty string. And as soon as we do that, our test should be green. All right, nice. All right, I think that's pretty much it. So I think we checked our requirements here as well. So far, we wrote the test based on all of our requirements, and I feel like I'm pretty confident that all of these tests should be doing what we are supposed to do based on the requirements. And if you notice, we haven't even opened our app once. This is kind of crazy. So these are all automated tests. So what we want to also make sure, right, to improve the quality, let's do the manual testing. So I think our survey is already running. So I'm gonna bring in my browser here. Oops. Let's see here. Yep, I think this should do it. Right, this is our React app. As you can see here, this is the form that we created with the label name, label email. This is the first time we're interacting. This is called the manual testing. So our button is disabled. So first requirement was input fields would have their own label called name. Okay, that's the case. The button is disabled. Now if we type something in the name field, the button is still disabled. If you type something in the email, now button is enabled. But if we go ahead and remove something from name, the button is disabled. We specifically tested on that on our automated test as well. And the last test requirement was to whenever we submit the button, and the form should get cleared and the submit button should be disabled. Nice, that is happening just like that. Cool. All right, I'm gonna bring this window to the other side. Oops. Right, now I hope you guys can only see my VS Code. Alrighty, I think now, as you can see the benefit, right? The purpose of this video wasn't how it used to look, but how it performs. So most of our test was relied on this automated testing, and we barely had to do manual testing, and we knew that it's going to work as expected because we wrote this test and we specifically tested all of those things. And the main benefit of doing this is now once you set up this and set it on your pipeline, this test is going to run every time whenever someone makes change. And let's say if someone comes here, for example, our requirement hasn't changed, right? Let's make that assumption. And if someone comes here and just does like for name, it's going to be like first name, let's say. If someone does that, oops, it shouldn't be passing. Wait, it's passing. Hold on, let's make it something random. HTML4, let's make it empty maybe. Is it gonna fail now? Okay, now it's failing. Let's say someone just messed up the label here, and it will directly catch you. It says unable to find, and that should how the requirement behave, right? And that's how you catch bugs. Because if someone was making this change, you were not there, right? Because you were the one who wrote this code. Our automated test will make sure, a new bugs we want to get introduced. I mean, if the requirement changes, then you're gonna have to update your test as well, because that's the different deal. All right, now before ending the video, what I want to show you guys is, let's see, the test coverage. You can see, once you write this unit test or integration test, right? You want to somehow visualize how well you are writing your tests, right? So in order to do that, what you're going to have to do is go to package.json. For right now, for test script, there is only one script right now. So I'm going to add one more script there. And I'm going to say something like, I'm going to have a key here. It's just going to say test : coverage. And here I'm gonna say React test scripts test, and I can pass a flag called hyphen hyphen coverage and put the comma at the end. And if I'm not wrong, I think that should be it. So if I run this script, I'll tell you, like, what's the purpose of this. I just want to make sure that this works. It's gonna run the test as usual, but what it's gonna do is it's gonna show, like, how many lines or statements or functions are covered on your entire test files. It's gonna look quite funky on the terminal. So what you want to do is, as soon as you run the test coverage, it opens up the coverage directory. It creates a new directory. So on the first directory, ICOB-report, you want to click that and grab the index.html file from there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my browser on left hand side now. So this is the file that I got. And right now, it's going to show all of your files where you have written your test cases. So if you don't have test cases written, it's not going to show it. Since we deal with app.js file, right, it says all of our statements are covered, meaning we tested each and every line of code. All of our branches are covered, and all of our functions are covered. So this is quite good. So what happens is, on corporate level job, right, they have these requirements, like, all right, if you submit the code, you're gonna have to, have some sort of coverage on your code, and there is a threshold. So if you guys will, like this video, I can create another video on how to enforce the testing coverage, so that someone writes something on your code base, and if they don't meet that threshold, or let's say, for example, my statement coverage should be 80%. Let's say I want to have all of the statements to be covered at least 80%. Otherwise, I won't allow anyone to merge in my repository at all. You can do that with pre-commit hooks and pre-push hooks. I can make a video on that one, but because I don't want to make this video longer, but if you guys are interested, please let me know in the comments. I can definitely make a video. Alright guys, I think I'm going to end the video right here. I hope this provided you some sort of value on like how to work on React and test-driven approach of development. As you saw, like, if you write your automated test properly, you don't even have to do manual testing a lot. You just have to do like small manual testing, and you're good. And you will know for sure, and you can say it with confidence, that you have a quality code. Alright, I think I'm going to end the video right here. If you liked or if you find the content useful, please give a thumbs up to the video and subscribe to the channel, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Thanks.